Paris in the spring of 1944 was a city of grim contrasts. At the bustling Place de la Contrescarpe, under the watchful eyes of German patrols, a young woman arranged bouquets of lilacs and tulips on her simple wooden pushcart. To the occupying soldiers, she was part of the scenery, a harmless flower girl, a decorative fixture of the conquered city. Some even stopped to buy a bloom for a sweetheart back in the barracks. They had no reason to suspect. But beneath the vibrant petals and the layer of damp, fragrant soil designed to confound any sniffer dog, lay a deadly secret. Nestled in a meticulously crafted false bottom were 20 tightly wrapped blocks of plastic explosive, 10 pounds each, delivered by a silent RAF parachute drop in the countryside the night before. By evening, this payload would be transferred to a sabotage team and used to blast a German troop train off the rails. This was not an isolated act of bravery. It was standard procedure. Across occupied Paris and throughout France, women street vendors, the most invisible figures in the Nazi hierarchy, became the essential arteries of the armed resistance. Declassified reports and resistance testimonies confirm that using carts just like this one, they moved an estimated 200 pounds of explosives, hundreds of Sten guns and pistols, and thousands of rounds of ammunition directly under the noses of the Gestapo. They enabled the relentless sabotage campaign that crippled German logistics in the vital months before the D-Day landings. The Nazi security apparatus, engineered to uncover clandestine meetings and root out male partisans, was utterly blind to the conspiracy conducted in plain sunlight by the people they dismissed as part of the decorative backdrop. How did these harmless women pull off the most dangerous deliveries of the war? And what does their story reveal about the hidden, world-altering power of those society deliberately overlooks? Occupied Paris was a city under a microscope. The Nazi regime enforced its control through a relentless, documented architecture of fear. Wehrmacht and Feldgendarmerie checkpoints choked every major intersection and bridge. Patrols of 4 soldiers, helmets gleaming, marched with metronomic regularity. More insidious were the plainclothes agents of the Gestapo and their French collaborators in the dreaded milice, informants who turned neighbors into suspects. A strict curfew emptied the streets at night, and during the day, the barked command "Vas papiers" could come at any moment, triggering a nervous fumbling for identity cards. As chronicled in civilian diaries, the stress was omnipresent. This system was meticulously biased. German security directives, focused on preempting armed revolt, specifically targeted French men of military age, any male between 16 and 60. A man caught without flawless papers, or with calloused hands suggesting labor, or merely in the wrong place at the wrong time, faced immediate arrest, interrogation under torture, and likely deportation to a concentration camp or execution. This made traditional male couriers the weakest link in any clandestine chain. Simultaneously, the occupiers held a patronizing, often dismissive view of French women. While capable of extreme brutality, the Nazi ideology and many of its functionaries saw women primarily as apolitical actors, caretakers, shoppers, objects of leisure or domesticity. A woman pushing a market cart was a fixture of the domestic economy, not a potential combatant on the political battlefield. This was a profound, documented German blind spot. The punishment for defying this system was hideous and well known. Capture meant torture in the cellars of 84 Avenue Foch, the Gestapo's Paris headquarters, followed by deportation to the Ravensbrück concentration camp for women or a firing squad at the Fort Montvalérien. The Germans created an environment designed to make any clandestine movement seem not just difficult, but suicidal. This was the peak of their documented, suffocating control. Yet, within this very framework of pervasive suspicion, resistance planners identified a critical vulnerability, the one class of people their elaborate system was structurally designed to ignore. As the Gestapo rounded up suspected male resistors, the underground networks adapted. In the safe houses of the FTP, a new kind of operative was drafted. As one cell leader's memoir put it, "We needed someone the Boches would never see coming. We needed a flower girl." For the resistance in Paris, the most dangerous journey was often the last 10 miles. Under cover of darkness, brave reception committees in the French countryside would retrieve cylindrical containers parachuted by the RAF, each one holding 100 pounds of Sten guns, plastic explosive and ammunition, as noted in SOE operations reports. But retrieving the arms was only the first step. The real challenge, a logistical nightmare documented in resistance postmortems, was smuggling this tonnage into the heart of the lockdown, hypervigilant capital. Traditional methods were fatally flawed. A truck or car invited inevitable checkpoint inspections. Carrying heavy, suspicious suitcases made any courier a walking target for the Feldgendarmerie. Breaking the containers down into many small parcels required a small army of couriers, multiplying the risk of betrayal or a random identity check gone wrong. The resistance needed a secure, reliable pipeline. The ideal urban courier required a perfect legal alibi, a legitimate reason to be on the streets all day, a plausible excuse for moving heavy objects, a familiar face to neighbors and police, and, most crucially, a way to hide contraband in plain sight. Without solving this riddle, the resistance in Paris remained largely symbolic, capable of graffiti and distributing underground newspapers, but unable to deliver the violent sabotage needed to truly hamstring the German occupation. To blow rails, assassinate collaborators, or destroy vehicles, they needed explosives in the city, and they needed a ghost train to bring them in. This was the documented crisis, an acute material need colliding with an urban logistical siege. The brilliant, violent potential of the Allied airdrops was being neutralized not by Gestapo spies, but by the simple, crushing geography of checkpoints and suspicion. The resistance required a method so ordinary, so woven into the fabric of daily life, that it would be rendered invisible to the occupier's gaze. They needed a system that didn't avoid the checkpoints, but passed through them without a second glance. The solution was not invented in a lab, it was appropriated from the streets. The humble chariot de marque, the market cart, was about to become a weapon of war. The market cart was re-engineered for war. In secret workshops, resistors fabricated false bottoms with cavities 4 to 6 inches deep, enough for rows of plastic explosive blocks or stacks of pistols. Axles were sometimes bored out to hide rolls of banknotes or delicate detonators. Removable side panels allowed for swift access. The genius was in the balance. The weight of the legitimate top layer, sacks of potatoes, heavy blooms in wet soil, blocks of coal, perfectly masked the dense payload hidden below. As artifacts in the Musée de la Resistance show, they even used scent as a weapon. A layer of manure, fish offal, or strong local cheese in the cart could overwhelm the keen nose of any German patrol dog, rendering them useless. But the cart was only half the weapon. The courier herself was the other, more critical component. As SOE training manuals drilled into agents, the only sustainable cover was a real one. She didn't pretend to be a flower seller. She became one. She learned wholesale prices, the art of haggling, the best suppliers at Les Halles market. She built a genuine customer base of neighbors and even unwitting German soldiers. Her cover was a layered truth, making her virtually invisible to an enemy looking for furtive, suspicious behavior. She was a fixture. Her role was defined by network security. She operated as a single, insulated link in a cellular chain. A rural courier would bring the explosives to a prearranged rendezvous, often at a bustling suburban market. There, under the guise of a wholesale purchase, the blocks were transferred to her cart's hidden compartment. She would then spend her day making her rounds, delivering flowers or vegetables across several arrondissements. At each stop, a few blocks would be discreetly unloaded at a safe house, a bakery, a doctor's office, a bookstore, never holding a catastrophic quantity at any one time. This was documented resistance ingenuity, a distributed, resilient logistics network hidden within the city's daily commercial rhythm. The psychological burden was immense and constant. She carried the knowledge that a single mistake, a loose block of pea rattling, a hidden seam coming undone, a curious or excessively generous German deciding to buy her entire stock, meant a one-way trip to the torture chambers of Avenue Foch. Her courage was not the explosive, cinematic kind, but a quiet, daily defiance. A steady nerve maintained hour after hour, under the gaze of the enemy. This deep-cover tradecraft, perfected by necessity, stood in stark contrast to the verified German reliance on superficial surveillance and their ingrained biases about gender and class. With her cart prepared and her cover established, the deliveries began. German police bulletins from 1943 to 44 show a growing frustration with inexplicable leaks in their security. As sabotage materials continued to appear in the city center, her day began in the pre-dawn gloom at the wholesale markets of Les Halles. Amid the cacophony of vendors and porters, a silent exchange took place. A contact, posing as a supplier, would heave a heavy, innocuous-looking suitcase beside her cart. With practiced, casual movements, the transfer was made. Oily, pliable blocks of explosive slid from the case into the cart's hidden belly. They were covered with damp burlap, then buried under a vibrant, fragrant load of the day's legitimate stock, the perfect mask. Then began the perilous traverse. Pushing the now substantially heavier cart across Paris, its wheels clattering on the cobblestones, she entered a gauntlet of nerve. Every checkpoint was a high-stakes performance. For the regular Feldgendarme, a smile and a bonjour, monsieur. For the friendly one, perhaps a single flower offered freely. For the stern, suspicious type, a rehearsed story about a sick mother across town needing this delivery. Her papers had to be flawless, her demeanor perfectly balanced between respect and the slight impatience of a working woman with a long day ahead. Her route was a map of discreet destruction. A stop at a cafe, a bouquet delivered, a single explosive block left with the baker in the back room. A pause outside a school, a prearranged bouquet handed to a teacher, its wrapping concealing another block. A final call at a garage, selling flowers to the mechanic, the last of her deadly cargo exchanged. Each stop was a tiny, critical victory dispersing the risk. No single safe house held enough to cripple the network if she fell. The greatest tension was the constant, low-grade surveillance. The feeling of eyes on her back. A German staff car slowing as it passed. A Millis agent loitering on a corner, watching the crowd. Her training was internal. Never hurry. Never look over her shoulder. Never wipe a sweaty brow with a trembling hand. Her power lay in the of absolute, mundane normalcy amidst a city of fear. This was a documented life of minute-by-minute vulnerability, a hypervigilance maintained for hours on end, every single day. The greatest test was not the checkpoints, but the random, unpredictable interactions. In her post-war testimony, one courier described the day a German officer, in a jovial mood, decided to help her push her cart up a hill, unaware he was lending a hand to the very sabotage campaign he was fighting. The true test came not in the routine, but in the rupture. One hot July afternoon in 1943, at the Pont d'Austerlitz, her routine shattered. The checkpoint was not manned by the familiar, weary Wehrmacht, but by a squad of the SS, their collars bearing the Death's Head insignia. Their search was not procedural. It was violent theater. They were tearing apart market baskets, upturning suitcases. The officer in charge, his eyes cold, pointed at her cart. Entladen. Everything. Now. Her blood turned to ice. With deliberate, slow movements, fighting the urge to panic and run, she began unloading. Bundle after bundle of lilies and dahlias piled on the cobblestones. The SS man watched, growing impatient with her careful pace. Suddenly, he shoved the cart side. The wooden frame groaned, and the hidden compartment, under sudden stress, gave a faint but distinct crack. The sound was small, but in the tense silence, it was a thunderclap. The SS man's eyes snapped down. He knelt, drawing a combat knife, and began probing the seam of the false bottom, the tip of the blade seeking purchase in the crack. In that infinite second, as he pried, the fate of her network balanced on a knife's edge. Then, salvation screamed from the sky. The undulating, citywide wail of the air raid siren cut through the air. An Allied bomber formation was approaching, likely targeting the Renault factory across the Seine. The SS man froze, his head jerking upward. The routine of occupation was overruled by the primal instinct for survival. Cursing violently, he kicked the cart, miraculously uprighting it, and barked at his squad. In an instant, the checkpoint dissolved as the Germans scrambled for the nearest concrete shelter. She was left alone on the suddenly deserted bridge, heart hammering against her ribs, her hands frozen on the cart's handles. As one courier later testified, she stood as if made of stone. The moment passed, With trembling hands, she res-tacked the flowers, hiding the damaged seam, and pushed on, melting into the side streets as the first distant crump of bombs echoed over the rooftops. This was the razor's edge, survival hinging on improvisation, external chaos, and a stillness of nerve that prevented a fatal bolt. It revealed the enemy's flawed process. Even the feared SS were subject to haste, distraction, and their own protocols. Surviving such an event was a forge. For some, it broke them and they retired from active work. For others, like her, it hardened a cold, focused resolve. They had seen the limits of the enemy's omniscience and lived. They became more meticulous, more daring, understanding that luck was a weapon to be engineered where possible. Hundreds of deliveries were made without incident. The explosives she delivered blew up transformers, derailed trains, and assassinated collaborators. German sabotage incident reports from the Paris region show a sharp uptick in the summer and fall of 1943, a direct result of the supply lines run by her and women like her. The explosives delivered by the flower carts ignited a campaign of fire and steel across Paris. The plastic blocks she smuggled power documented devastating attacks. The repeated destruction of the German fuel depot at Issy-les-Moulineaux, starving vehicles of petrol. The derailment of a troop train near the Gare de l'Est in 1944, causing heavy casualties. The assassination of SS Colonel Julius Ritter, the brutal organizer of France's forced labor draft, gunned down by FTPMOI partisans in broad daylight. German police reports from the period chronicle a rising tide of terrorist incidents, a direct result of the supply lines these invisible couriers maintained. Inevitably, the Gestapo adapted. They began profiling street vendors, placing some under surveillance. The anonymity that was a courier's shield could be shattered by a single informant or a careless associate. Many were arrested. In the cellars of Avenue Foch, they were tortured for names and drop points. Those who survived interrogation were deported to the concentration camp system, primarily Ravensbrück for women. Theirs was not a soldier's death, but a descent into a hell of starvation, forced labor, and systematic brutality. The personal cost was catastrophic and often silent. After the war, there were rarely parades for these women. Most returned, if they returned at all, to quiet, private lives, carrying profound psychological and physical scars. Their extraordinary contribution, moving not just a symbolic 200 pounds, but facilitating the distribution of tons of Allied-supplied material, remained largely uncelebrated, known only to their surviving comrades. They were the essential, hidden logistics core of the urban uprising. This documented operational success, which materially degraded German control in the capital, was paid for with profound, individual human sacrifice. The Gestapo's eventual, brutal efficiency in capturing some of these couriers stands as a grim testament to what happened when the most sophisticated secret police force in Europe finally focused on the right target. But by then, the damage was done. The explosives had already blown, the rails were already cut, and the tide of the war had irrevocably turned. The immediate tactical victories were clear. But in the larger strategic picture, evaluated by SOE and OSS planners after the war, the flower cart couriers had done something even more valuable. They had proven a principle of clandestine warfare. The flower cart campaign delivered a masterclass in clandestine logistics that was immediately studied and institutionalized. Within the SOE and OSS post-war assessments validated a powerful doctrine. The most effective cover is a real life. The strategic recruitment of low-profile individuals, women, the elderly, those in mundane professions, who could leverage societal biases to become invisible, was enshrined as a core principle. It was a lesson in turning the enemy's perception into a weapon against them. This hard-won knowledge did not disappear in 1945. It flowed directly into the fledgling CIA and the revitalized MI6, who dissected these resistance networks as blueprints for building clandestine cells behind the Iron Curtain. The flower cart became a textbook case of nondescript vehicular concealment, a proof of concept that the most sophisticated surveillance could be defeated by perfect, lived-in normalcy. Modern case officers are still taught the foundational importance of natural cover, a doctrine written in the streets of occupied Paris. Beyond tradecraft, the moral and symbolic legacy is profound. These women fundamentally redefined notions of courage and combat. They proved that heroism could wear an apron, that the home front could be the most dangerous front of all, and that refusing to be seen as a threat was, in itself, a devastating tactical advantage. They were not auxiliary helpers. They were essential, frontline operators whose work enabled kinetic violence against the occupier. Yet, their history remains intimate, not epic. Their stories are preserved less in grand military chronicles and more in the fragile, fading oral testimonies collected by local historians, in small exhibits in regional museums, and ironically, within the meticulous, hate-filled files of the Gestapo that hunted them. Their victory was in the act, not the acclaim. This documented Allied adoption of sophisticated, human-centric clandestine principles stands in stark contrast to the verified German failure to adapt their counterinsurgency thinking beyond brute force, repression, and a rigid worldview that ultimately blinded them to the threat pushing the flower cart up the hill. Historians of gender, war, and resistance now see these women not as helpers, but as frontline combatants in a new kind of war, a war where the battlefield was the street and the weapon was perception itself. The story of the flower cart couriers is a landmark in the history of conflict, illuminating three profound truths. First, it is a masterful case study in gendered resistance. The Nazis' own patriarchal worldview, their perception of women as apolitical, domestic, and harmless, created a catastrophic operational blind spot. As scholar Margaret Collins White's documents, these women weaponized the occupier's bias against them, transforming condescension into a form of tactical invisibility. Their success is a timeless lesson. The assumptions of an oppressive regime about who holds power can become its most fatal vulnerability. Second, it represents a foundational chapter in the evolution of guerrilla logistics. The principle demonstrated, using the most mundane, trusted, and locally ubiquitous form of transport to move the instruments of war, has echoed through every asymmetric conflict since. From the bicycle bombs of the Viet Cong to the improvised explosive devices moved by donkey cart in the mountains of Afghanistan, the core idea remains. The best logistical vehicle is the one the enemy dismisses as part of the scenery. The flower cart was an early, brilliant prototype in this enduring art of clandestine supply. Finally, their legacy redefines and deepens the memorialization of the resistance. It shifts the narrative from the romantic, often male-centric image of the Maquisard fighting in the hills to honor the urban resistors, particularly women, who waged a different kind of war. Their battlefield had no clear front lines. It was the checkpoint, the marketplace, the familiar street where every interaction was a potential trap. As historian Robert Gildea argues, this fight in the shadows was just as critical to choking the occupation as the ambushes in the countryside. It forces us to expand our definition of a warrior to include the woman whose weapon was not a rifle, but her intimate knowledge of daily rhythms and her unshakable performance of normalcy under unimaginable pressure. Their documented legacy is one of quiet female empowerment and breathtaking tactical innovation. It stands in permanent contrast to the verified historical blindness of oppressive regimes, which so often mistake the silence of the marginalized for submission, and the tools of daily life for anything but potential instruments of liberation. They proved that, in the calculus of resistance, the most powerful actor is sometimes the one the enemy believes holds no power at all. So, what is the ultimate, blooming lesson from this story of flowers, fear, and freedom? The ultimate lesson, documented in the frantic revisions of Gestapo policy, is this: in the struggle against tyranny, the most effective weapon is often the one the enemy does not believe is a weapon at all. The Nazis obsessed over the communist, the Jew, the male partisan in hiding. They never saw the flower seller as a threat, and that unwavering bias was their fatal operational error. She didn't fight with a rifle but with a rose. Her battlefield was the marketplace. Her armor was her apparent harmlessness, and her victories were measured in silent deliveries and the sudden, shocking explosions that crippled the occupation's infrastructure. This story is a permanent monument to the unsung heroes of every war, the civilians, the women, the ordinary people who, when tested by extremity, perform extraordinary acts with the simple tools of their daily lives. Their courage was not in a single charge, but in the thousand small acts of defiance required to push a heavy cart through a city of fear, day after day. Their success forced even their most vicious enemies to reluctantly acknowledge their power. Consider this directive from a Gestapo weekly summary for Paris, Late 1943. The continued success of terrorist sabotage in the city center suggests a highly efficient supply network operating in open daylight. Previous assumptions about courier profiles must be revised. All street vendors, particularly women, are now to be considered potential enemy agents. This story is hidden in Gestapo frustration and the fading memories of old women. If you want to uncover more true stories of the everyday heroes who fought World War II without firing a shot, subscribe. We follow the scent of the resistance. Next time, we'll reveal another hidden front. The Ghost Army of World War II. How 1,100 American artists, designers, and sound engineers used inflatable tanks and radio trickery to fool the entire German army is a story of illusion that changed the war. History whispers a warning. Beware the innocent with a cart. For in their baskets they may be carrying not just bread or flowers, but the seeds of your destruction.